It is dotNYC number 4. We're still learning what the hell we're doing. We don't have the faintest idea, as you can see from the evidence. And we're playing around and trying new stuff all the time. So I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be on the Twit Network. This is the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. dotNYC is a new podcast about tech and New York. And with me is the bridge to all the ands in technology and media, Justin Hendrix.
Good morning.
Who is the, thank you, Justin's great to be here. Justin is the head of the
NYC Media Lab.
And so tell us about that for a second.
NYC Media Lab is a project in New York City. It's a consortium of multiple universities in the city. CUNY is one of the participating universities. Consortium of those universities, and then a bunch of media and communications companies. So they range from the Associated Press and Audible onto Viacom and Verizon. And we do R&D projects at the intersection of the interests of those corporate members and faculty and students on the campuses.
And you bring in all kinds of great projects. It's in Brooklyn. It's in the heart of the new hip universe.
We work out of the NYU School of Engineering in downtown Brooklyn.
And we like you anyway.
Thank you.
Just a couple things in the news to talk about first before we have some great guests, including Jen Hensley from Link NYC, who's going to be bringing the internet to all around New York. When Leo Laporte was here in New York, we got all excited when we saw one of these obelisks of web access, and it's not working yet, but we got excited. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the NYC Parks Periscope channel and some other stuff as well. So, in the news, I just came from breakfast. I dashed in with Eric Newton, who used to be at the Knight Foundation, which is the primary funder of journalism activities in the U.S., and full disclosure, I had something called the Tau Knight Center here at CUNY. And Eric is now at Arizona State University as doing innovation. But this morning, the Knight Foundation announced a gigantic $60 million project with Columbia University. And I would be jealous, but they have certain special characteristics that make this happen around the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And Eric explained to me that this is about, obviously, the law. It is about journalism and media, and it's also now about engineering and technology. And so the way he told me about this is that we're at a point now where First Amendment is not just about protecting newspapers, obviously. Right. First Amendment is about protecting speech across all these new platforms from all these new speakers who couldn't be heard before, now can be heard, and to take an active role in protecting this most precious of our rights.
Right.
So I think it's a big deal. It's a big deal for New York that this is centered here. And it's a huge amount of money. I think they're going to do $5 million each and then $25 million endowment each, and then they're going to raise some more money on top of that. And this is about protecting the First Amendment, which I think is critical at a time when I think that Americans don't value this special thing enough.
There are a lot of questions, obviously, in the news every day that sort of tie back to this, from court cases to, problems with the tech companies that we see playing out in the headlines. I've only read a little bit about the announcement about the Columbia project, but it sounds perfectly timed. It seems like it's absolutely a necessary investigation, and it seems right that it's going to happen here in New York, actually.
Yeah, I think it is. Better than Washington, D.C., by the way, because it's not just about government law. It is also about these industries that depend upon the First Amendment and that are dealing with it. Let's take an example now, which is the case from last week. I wasn't on This Week in Google last week because I was in Mexico City, so it's a little bit stale news, but I didn't get to have a chance to pontificate about this last week there. Is the case of Facebook and the Gizmodo story that allegedly there was a secret conference room where young whippersnappers were dared to edit the trending report, and included in the allegation from one of them, a conservative, him or herself, was that they were particularly targeting and keeping off conservative news.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that story?
You know, there's been so much written, and to me, whether this particular incident was the cause for great controversy or concern, I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like it. I feel like most of the commentators I've read sort of come down on that, on the side of that argument. But it did feel like a sort of watershed moment, a moment of awakening for a lot of people who maybe didn't understand this issue in great detail. And I think we'll see, many more moments like this as people sort of wake up to the idea that the information they're seeing over social networks on the internet could potentially be manipulated in some way, either on purpose or just through disregard. And that, I think, is the main story. That's the thing. People are aware now, and it's becoming more sort of, it's seeping into the public consciousness.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that, but
Sure.
So I wrote a piece on Medium called "Facebook Needs an Editor," and arguing not to edit,
Yeah.
but instead an editor who I think would be more of a public advocate within the world of Facebook. My reaction was that first and foremost, I barely noticed Facebook trending.
Yeah.
I never clicked on it. I found
only
it
out
was,
of the corner of your eye, right?
It was kind of
Over there.
taboola,
Yeah, sure.
outbrain, virus. It's the things I'm now trained never to click on.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody tells me that's hot, I'm not clicking there because I'm going to be going down a rabbit hole. Second, from Twitter, we've long presumed that because it says trending, not hottest, not most important, not most traffic, that it's manipulated in some way,
Right,
algorithmically or humanly. It's manipulated to try to push things they think are going to click. I've assumed that's the case at Twitter. I've assumed that's the case here. Third, I don't think Gawker is a company to exactly lecture us on journalistic sterling standards. Fourth, I think it's critical that this idea that there's a black box where judgments are being made. Well, that's
Right.
called journalism.
Right.
Right? In this building where the New York Herald Tribune was edited, next door where the New York Times is edited, they're quite opaque in how they decide what you should know.
Sure.
And what they think is trending and what they think is important and what they think is cool. We call that news judgment. Indeed, I almost wish that the kids in that conference room at Facebook instead would take over CNN and bring a little of that same news judgment there, where they're giving tons of time to a certain New York demagogue who's now headed down the way, getting way too much attention out of anything that I would call journalistic news judgment. So the weird thing, Mark Andreessen does these great tweets where he'll put the contrary opinion, right? Technology is good. It's going to change everything.
Absolutely.
Technology is bad because it changes nothing. So in this case, I think that the Andreessen-style tweet should have been something about how, oh my God, algorithms are taking over for humans. Oh my God, humans are involved in algorithms.
But I think people are instinctively responding to something they don't maybe necessarily understand. The CTO of Facebook was at a conference in New York a couple of months ago, an AI conference that was held at NYU, and he was talking about the future of artificial intelligence. He mentioned that they have 700 machine learning engineers working on the platform, making trillions of predictions a day. And when you you think about traditional media, how many machine learning engineers are there in the whole of the news industry? There's a kind of a mismatch there, and whether it technically matters or not, I think it puts people in a place where they're frightened of the implications of it, what it means to have the world sort of delivered to them through this filter, this algorithmic filter.
Right, but so the fear in the past was there's this mysterious black box algorithm that's making decisions and pushing things on you, right? And that's always been the controversy.
Absolutely.
And now the controversy is, oh my God, humans mucked around with the algorithm.
But there was sort of an understanding that many of these institutions, who had leaders who had been trained in places like the CUNY-School of Journalism, there were certain practices, there were certain sort of ethical principles that were baked into these organizations, especially the ones that were trusted. So your point about having a public editor at Facebook makes some sense, but probably needs to go far beyond that. Way more transparency in the way the technology works, way more public disclosure. Some people have suggested things like some kind of public board. And whether that would work or not, we're early days, but it does tie very much back to the Columbia.
That's exactly where I was
$60 million, because these are the types of questions that are going to be important throughout the 21st century. And what is news beyond news, into data, into many other fields, the way information comes at us, the way our information is manipulated by the companies that offer us services. It's all going to tie back to these questions.
Right, and when we've talked about transparency in the past, I hear this from journalists all the time. The algorithm should be transparent, as if they're news meetings or not, but we'll leave that to the side. But then I say, what would you do with a transparent algorithm? You'd game it. You'd try to get your stories higher up. But I think the point you just made is really important. the transparency we need is not to the functioning of the algorithm or the functioning of a news meeting. The transparency we need is to the principles that govern them.
That's right.
And to think about those principles, know someone is thinking about those principles. Someone's
That's
there.
right.
I can get to a human being to say you've got the wrong principle in operation.
Because algorithms have the same problems people do. In fact, algorithms are just expressions of principles that people have written into the computer. The thing to remember is that algorithms make mistakes they don't even intend to make as well. So there's a great woman at Columbia University, Roxana Giabasu, who's done a lot of work. She testified at PrivacyCon, the FTC's big conference on privacy recently. She's done a lot of work looking at unintended discrimination that occurs due to algorithmic, services. Everything from your Gmail to, and we've seen other evidence of this, to Amazon deciding who to deliver same day to based on, seemingly statistics or numbers that end up excluding the poor, right? So there are lots of these issues sort of baked into this.
Okay, so you bring up the FTC. This is the heart of where my fears go, which is calls to, regulate Facebook in a way that we would never consider, in this country at least, maybe Europe's different, but in this country we would never consider to regulate the New York Times,
right,
or even the New York Post, or even Fox News. That if we have the cloak of news and journalism around it, the First Amendment takes effect. To my mind, Facebook has, and others have said this online in the last week, a First Amendment right to choose what to put in that little box on Facebook. And that we now have a senator demanding Mark Zuckerberg come to Jesus in Washington,
right,
and explain why this is happening. I'm not sure it's the right of that senator to demand crap of Mark Zuckerberg. Is an algorithm an expression of free speech?
I think we have to be very careful, and hopefully initiatives like the one at Columbia will be part of that, part of us thinking through these problems deeply. And not responding to the news and passing legislation or regulation just as a result of singular incidents like this. That would be unfortunate, I think. But, I also think that this all ties back to, maybe, are we leaving him nameless, the GOP presumptive presidential nominee?
No, you can say it. Just wash your mouth out after you say it.
I think it ties back to this sort of sense in the country right now that, what the heck's going on? There must be something behind this sort of environment that we've got right now, and perhaps someone's fiddling with the algorithm, and that's messing everybody up.
Well, I'm trying to find it just for. See, that's the other thing we do on Twig shows is we don't worry about staring at the camera, and we look at our computer. We're trying to find something because there was a great piece this last week. Greg Esterbrook. When did optimism become uncool?
Yeah.
Right. I thought it was a wonderful piece. I say that as an optimist.
Yeah.
And I think we're here in a land of trying to do that. But it's exactly that point you just made, Justin. Is that there's this perception now that things are broken and uncool and a mess and it becomes dystopian.
Yep.
And Obama's I'm not trying to get political, honestly, but Obama's arguments of the last few commencement speeches are, things are a lot better off than anybody's saying. What leads us to this dark, cloudy view? And then that, in turn, influences the actions that we take as a society.
Yeah, I think people feel that instinctively. They're trying to understand what's going on. Why are these tensions, just really, really boiling over at the moment? What's driving that? And maybe people are looking for some explanation to this phenomena and somehow maybe Facebook's responsible somehow.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's maybe it's perfect for this venue. It's a very loosely formed or poorly formed thought, but it's something that's occurred to me.
We specialize in poorly formed thoughts. Yes, that's exactly what we do. And I think it's important too because you and I are involved in attempting to be optimistic about New York and technology.
Absolutely.
Right. What kind of arguments do you hear against technology? Do you get kind of labeled as there's the geek guy, or you only hang out with geeks, so it doesn't matter?
I think I am immersed, obviously, in the geekdom in New York City a bit. So I'm sort of part of that group. But it's interesting to me. I mean, one of the sort of startups that we have here in our notes in front of us, I think, is interesting in this regard.
Please.
If I can transition into that, there's a company called what'd she call it? Where is it at here? She calls it Screen. I read about this from the notes that the producer sent. They've raised $1.9 million to fix your family's tech addiction.
So tell me about that.
It's an interesting article because it's sort of a startup that essentially is a kind of an IoT service that it essentially is going to allow you, as a parent perhaps, to limit the amount of screen time that you and your children are engaging with in the home. So it's going to plug up to your different devices, and let's say you choose between 6 and 8 p.m. There's no screen time in your house, no checking Twitter, Jeff Jarvis. It will essentially disable the device for that time, or disable the Wi-Fi.
What do you think
perhaps.
about that?
I think it's interesting. I think people are beginning to feel the pressures of this sort of content explosion, this social media explosion. They're spending so much time with it. We've seen them eking out every second of the day to remain connected and to consume digital media. And there's sort of almost an organic movement that's sort of springing up, that's sort of saying, well, let's think about this type of consumption. Let's think about the degree to which we're engaging on these platforms, and maybe we should think twice. So I think that's neat, and I do see some sort of evidence of that happening here in New York City. So that just something I wanted to tie the conversation back to.
If we could turn it off while people are crossing the street.
Yes, that would certainly be a good idea.
Might be. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of my problem is I used to be a TV critic, so I couldn't exactly be haughty telling my kids not to watch television when I did it and got paid for it. And there's a drinking game on Twig shows, and every time I say Gutenberg, you can take a
Thank God it's water, right? Yeah.
They didn't give you the tequila. But when we go back to the invention of the book, there were fears that, oh my God, people are spending too much time reading these new book things, and then there's a problem with this. The problem I have with those kinds of movements and startups is that they demonize the tool.
Right.
And the tool is just a tool. And if you make the tool bad, you make that which is good that can be done with it bad also.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Although I know that I personally have a problem sometimes putting the device down.
Oh, I definitely do.
And do wish that I could look up and perhaps take more joy in the moment, right? So I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. I don't think it will necessarily become a completely mainstream behavior, but there will be a segment of the culture that will want to do those types of things.
One other thing we should probably mention, since we are at the City University of New York, is that our mayor, Bill de Blasio, just announced an initiative around open data, the NYC Digital Playbook that prioritizes service delivery. No city. Do you know anything more about this?
I haven't read a whole lot about this particular initiatives, but New York City has really been a leader. This is one thing where the city has absolutely been a leader in open data and making data available. And I think it's a great initiative to essentially put more information out, to give people the opportunity to understand the principles that the city is employing when it thinks about data. And that I think it again ties back to the conversations that we've been having so far.
Yeah.
So it seems like the right way forward.
So good. Now.